This next method for dodging and burning is the one that most people know as the two curves method or the two curves adjustment layers method. And it is true, we are going to be using the two curves adjustment layers to set up our layers palette in a way that we can work on an image and achieve the dodge and burn results. But the same principle can equally apply to virtually any tonal correction adjustment layer within Photoshop, and we can also use our blend modes to pretty much set up our layers palette to do the same thing. And I'll go over that in a minute, but before I do, let's begin with explaining how the actual technique that most people know as the two curves method work. If I go under my adjustment panel, I can click on the curves layer, and if using CS5, I'm not sure if this is available in all the versions, you have an option here to choose between different presets. And for the demonstration purposes, just to make sure that everything is by the book, by the numbers, if you will, I'm just going to include this preset called lighter. When I do, you can see that my midtones has been raised up. And that will basically lighten my image, as you can see here, but it happened on the entire image. What I want to do is limit this effect by inverting the mask, and any adjustment layer also comes with the layer mask, and this is true if under adjustment panel option you have this turned on. I believe the name for it is was add layer mask or something along those lines, but I'm not seeing it here, and I think that's because I have to be in the adjustment panel kind of like the first view. So if I click now, there it is, add mask by default. So if that option is on by default, and it is if you install just Photoshop, you will see a layer mask. It's usually white at the end, at the beginning, so that means that when I click on it, it's just gonna lighten the image. And we can call this one dodge, because we are lightening the image in a way. Now I want to invert this mask, so I'm going to select the mask and press Ctrl or Command I. I stands for invert. When I do, the mask becomes black. And if you know anything about masking, white reveals, black conceals. That's pretty much the simplest way of explaining how it works. So black will hide any effect that's associated with that mask, and white will reveal it. So now that we have our black mask, if we wanted to dodge a certain area, we wanted to lighten it, we will use, of course, our brush tool, and we will paint with the opposite color of the mask, which would be the white. So if I were to paint now, you can see that now I'm letting the curves adjustment to be seen through the mask and affect the image. If I alt click or option click on the mask, I can see where I just painted. So that's pretty much the most simplest way I can explain it. Let me go back. Well, that's for dodging. We can only do one adjustment for dodging and one for burning. We can't do both. So if I wanted to do the burn adjustment, I would have to create another curves layer, and I will again go to my presets, and this time instead of choosing a lighter, I will choose the exact opposite, and that will be this one, darker. And as you can see, it darkened my image. Again, we will invert the mask, Control or Command I for invert, rename it burn, and if I use my brush just as I did before, click on the mask, paint with white, I'm going to darken part of the image. Now what I'm going to do now is select both of those adjustments, and I'm going to group them, just because it's much easier to just turn off the group to see before and after of the dodging and burning process. So I'll select both of those layers, I'll hold down my Alt or Option key, and I'm going to drag them down to this group icon, and that will prompt me to rename or name the group. Well, let's call it dodge and burn. I guess we can just call it dodge and burn. There's no need to add anything else. All the other settings will leave as they are, and click OK. And now I have them under one group. If I collapse my adjustment palette, so you can see better. So this is for burning and this is for dodging. Now, unlike before when we worked with the same tool, we will work here with the same tool, but this time we have to switch between different layers, and we can use the Alt key or Option key to just switch between, you know, background and foreground color. We can do that, but at the time, at one pass, we have to work either on the burn layer or on the dodge layer. So it is a bit slower in that way. You don't have as much flexibility, but you do have some other benefits, and we'll see how that works in a minute. So that's how we have now prepared this image to be dodged or burned. Well, as you remember from the previous videos, again, I'm going to activate my help layer to see exactly what do I need to work on. And it created it inside a group because I had my group selected, so I'm just going to drag it outside the group. And just as I did before, first I'm going to zoom by pressing the controller command plus, and I'm going to zoom to 50%. And I'm going to lower my red slider, increase the yellows a bit, like so, and now I can see the horrific state in which this image is and what needs to be burned or dodged. So let's begin. I'm going to click on my dodge layer, and instead, for this, really at this point I don't need the adjustment panel, and because I want to show you the whole layers panel, and we have our small screen to work on, I'm going to collapse my adjustment panel. I'm going to click on my dodge layer, and I'm going to change some settings here. I'm going to reduce my hardness to 0%, maybe make my brush a bit smaller, zoom to something like so, and now I'm going to change some settings down here. Transfer, I'm going to activate that one, and this one as well. I'm going to lower my flow to something like 15% to see how that works. It should be a bit different because now I don't have the level of illumination or the level of dodging as I had with the previous two methods, because now I'm limiting it with my curves. Remember, if I opened it, I have limiting it. I've just increased the lightness of, this is the 100% lightness for me at this point. So I might need to use a brush with higher flow or opacity values. And if I were to now work on this area, actually this setting works pretty well. It will allow me to fix the areas that I need pretty nicely. And because I am using my pressure sensitive tablet, I set up my options in a way I did. I can do this pretty subtly. You're going to have to work with your own settings. And as far as the settings go for your brush tool and for dodging and burning and all that stuff, well, I explained how each of the specific settings and methods and brush settings and all that flow, opacity, airbrush and all that stuff work. But they may vary based on the user, not only the personal preference thing, but also if you might be using a mouse instead of pen and tablet, or you might be using a different model for your... I did hear something that it's kind of habit for me at this point, because I'm always using almost always using the soft light layer to dodge and burn. Now I actually switched between foreground and background colors, and when I do it here, I have to switch on the burn tool to burn. If I do it here, I'm just deleting the mask, right? So that was a habit, and while I talked I really wasn't paying attention. But if you are using one method, and you're not used to using the other method, it can be kind of, I guess, a bit troublesome to switch your mind to use one and the other method. Well, one thing I guess you can do is work on 10 images using your preferred method and then switch to other method just to get some new flow information through your brain, just to keep an edge on things, you know, to stay in shape, if you will. And I was talking before I made the mistake about settings for your brush. And what I wanted to say is that when we go in the next chapter to do some real dodging and burning on real images, and I'm going to be focusing mostly on dodging and burning now, how all of this works, Then I can show you how exactly I used all of the settings that I explained previously and in this chapter as well, to combine them to bring me the most out of my tools. But for right now, I don't want you to worry about those. This is just the way to show you how the technique works on its own. And this method produces some very nice results. At the end of the day, any method of those three that I mentioned you use, you can achieve the same results. And I showed you some of the benefits of the previous one, and I will show you some of the benefits of this one as well as some flaws. But as far as the end results go, well, that's entirely up to you. I believe that you can achieve the same results using all three methods, especially the soft light and this one. Let's see how am I progressing. If I deactivate this, you can see that I'm nicely fixing the areas. Now if I alt click on the mask, I can actually pretty obviously see where the mask is going to. I mean, what am I doing to the mask? You can see my individual smaller brush strokes and the bigger ones. And if I zoom back out and deactivate the mask, you can see how am I progressing pretty nicely. Not too much work, and it did a nice job. Now there are some areas that I'm gonna just dodge real slightly here. Then I'm gonna switch to my burn layer to show you how that works. And of course, by this point, I'm sure you can understand that mechanics behind this technique. It's pretty straightforward, especially if you've been using curves for color correction and tonal corrections. Then this is pretty much natural to you, I'm sure. Alright, I think I'm gonna just dodge a few more areas, and then I'm gonna switch to my burn tools to darken some of the areas. Here is the problem. I am now need to lighten this area even more, but I can't because sorry, if I open my panel, because of this limitation here. That's one of the flaws. You kind of set your limit in advance. I could have raised this up even more, I mean real up, and then I wouldn't have this problem probably. But this is one of the things you need to worry about. If you raise it too low, you're gonna get subtle effects, and it's pretty cool. I mean, you can control, especially if you have pressure sensitive tablet, how much you wanna let through the mask. But if you're using it just your mouse, you may need to have more patience and be more meticulous in your planning when pulling this up. Oops. Well, let me collapse that for a second. And let's fix a few more areas. Okay, now I'm gonna open up and work on my burn layer. Click on that. Now let's see where we have some areas need burning, like this area right here. There's some wider area here, wider area here. I'm just evening out the skin. Also, there's one other thing you need to know about this method, and that is if you went too far and you're not seeing the results right now, because it's a curves layer, it's a parametric adjustment, you can easily not only adjust the opacity of the layer, but you can also adjust the individual curve. Now we'll see how that works in just a moment. Alright, this area needs a bit more darkening, but not too much. Alright, let's see how this works when I zoom back out. I can still see some areas, so I'm gonna really quickly fix that. And let's see the entire before and after. this is not the final approach. This is just the first pass, I would say, the preliminary pass and of dodge and burn. And as you can see, we're moving along quite nicely. Let's deactivate our help layer to see before and after in real time. I mean in normal mode. That's going pretty nicely, I guess. And I won't spending too much time on this image using the method because I've already dodged and burned certain areas, so you know how this works, and you can now see definitely how this particular method works. So let's check out some of the options that we have here. If I click on my dodge layer and if I open up my adjustment panel, you can see now that all of those areas where the my mask is white, that's where I'm affecting the image. But I can also move this up and down to achieve the contour effect. And of course, if you know, right now I'm not making any effect because I just clear out my dot. So I'm gonna switch to my, that's why it's always cool to have those presets. Lighter, it's gonna bring me back to where I was. Now this is being a curve layer and we are in the RGB mode. We can switch between different channels and I can add or subtract different colors from the same area, as you can see here. So we have our composite where we affect all the individual colors as well as the contrast. So basically we're just using it to affect the contrast of the image. And here we can work on individual channels and we can add or subtract different colors. We can even work on different dots. So you can see I can only affect this area, which is pretty cool. So if I dodge and burn over an area that's like her forehead, and then I dodge and burn over an area that represents some darker tones like shadows, then I can set up a curve in a way that I'm just adding or subtracting color in that area of tones. That's something unique to curves. You can do this with, I guess, with levels, but I guess the only difference with levels, you can use levels instead of curves here, but with levels, and let me open up a level just so I can show you. With levels, you only have three handles, so you can affect three different things per RGB and per different channels. Well, with they're pretty easy to understand. It's visually pretty simple interface. So if curves are too complicated for you, then this is maybe the better method. But unlike levels, which can do only 3 points, with curves you have an option to add about 16 points, if I'm not mistaken, per RGB and per channel, and that allows you a lot more flexibility. So that's, per channel, if you compare 3 against 16 points, that gives you a much more flexibility when using curves. The burn layer, which allows us to affect just the areas that we burned, it's a curve layer, so it adds us the same type of functionality as we saw in the previous example. We can do all the things just as we did there. Now let me show you something. So these would be the curves, two curves method. Well, you can use virtually any other method to achieve the same results. Now let me show you. Like I mentioned, levels can do the same thing. I can go under my preset, I can say darker, for instance. That's going to darken my image. If I go even more darker, I'm just going to invert my mask, Control or Command I, and when I paint, I'm achieving the burn effect. So you can use your levels to do exactly that. Well, what else can you do? If I click on my exposure adjustment layer, I can affect image in different ways. So it is a bit of a tonal adjustment. I can use it to achieve the same effects by inverting the mask. if I open up my brightness and contrast, I can achieve the same results, right? And most of these other tonal adjustments, but let's say I click on, well, let's find something like channel mixer. So I do have constant slider, which doesn't affect the luminosity values, just alone. And I do have these other sliders. Well, I could theoretically, right, I could switch from blend mode normal to luminosity blend mode, so I'm not only affecting the, not the colors, but luminosity values. And now I can play with this to darken or lighten an image. Or I can use some other sliders here. Or I can switch from to normal and not touch any of the sliders. Well, there are two additional blend modes that darken or lighten your image. And when you're using this adjustment layer, the size of your document doesn't go up all that much. And if you take a look, it used to be 54 megabytes. And with all these layers, it didn't add all that much, only 3 megabytes. It's not like I copied the entire background layer. Well, once we have opened one of those adjustment layers, we call it dummy layer. We don't affect any of the, don't use any of the sliders. All we have to do is change one of the blend modes, and it will work just as it would if we copied the background. So I can change this to multiply, and that will darken my image. If I invert the mask, I paint, I get the burn effect. If I switch from multiply to screen, I'm getting the opposite. I'm lightening the image, right? So if I click on the mask, inverted, Control Command I, you can paint, and that's going to be my dodge layer. So that's how you can use it. Oh yeah, if I click on my channels mixer now, I clicked on my mask. If I go to this icon to delete it, it will say delete layer mask. Then it will prompt me. Well, if you want to go without that little message, you can just alt click on this icon and that will not display the message. But if you want to delete the entire layer, then you would click on it and press the delete. I'm not sure if this is in CS3 or earlier versions, but I think this is something quite new they added to Photoshop. Alright, so the next thing I wanted to show you is if I were to, I'm going to deactivate the layers group for dodge and burn. I'm going to copy the background layer and I'm going to set it to multiply. Add a layer mask. I'm just going to alt or option click on the mask to add black mask. And of course, if I now work using those blend modes, I'm actually getting the same result, just like with the dummy layer. And but the problem, of course, is that now I've increased my size quite significantly. So if you are going to be using that for the purpose of dodging and burning or something like that, then dummy layer is a better option. And dummy layer, once again, is any adjustment layer that you didn't pull any sliders on. So you just clicked on it to create a layer and then you change the blend mode. And that's how dodging and burning using these two curves layers work. And I just show you how you can use other methods to work on an image. Well, as I mentioned before, and we'll go over that in a minute in the next video, and that is that when you're dodging and burning, you get two side effects, right? You lower the contrast of your image simply by evening out the skin, and the second side effect is that you introduce some color shifts. Now I showed you how you can use your curves to affect with individual channels the color of your image to counteract the effect of dodging and burning. And you can also use it on just areas that represent just the dark or lighter areas. I mean your shadows, your midtones, or your highlights. Well, if you wanted to use another adjustment layer to work with the color, and you could reselect by control or command clicking, you can reselect the mask or the areas where you just painted. That's pretty much the same deal as you would get if you were using the blank layer set to soft light. Remember when I showed you? And now you can create another adjustment layer, whichever one you want, and it will transfer the selection into the new mask, which is identical looking to the one before. Well, let's get back to normal mode. Well, what does that do for us? Well, to better illustrate that, I'm gonna have to work on an area to get that color shift. Now, this is an image that doesn't have too much color, so that might not be a problem. And I'm gonna exaggerate the effect just to see if I can get that color shift more visible. I'm gonna create a new adjustment layer for vibrance, and I'm gonna increase the vibrance quite a bit. And I did that just above the background layer, and then we have this group for dodging and burning where we have our burn and dodge layers. Now let's see. Actually, it did a pretty good job. It didn't affect the image too much. I just picked a wrong example, I believe. So in the next video, I'm going to have to pick a better one to demonstrate this problem. But since that kind of shifting of the color and fixing it corresponds to a side effect, I would guess, then the video about side effects would be maybe more appropriate for this. But just so you know, like the preparation for that video, if you control or command click on your mask, you're in fact selecting it. Once again, this selection doesn't look like it's selecting everything, but that's just a preview. Trust me, everything that you see that's not black is selected in great detail. And that's pretty much the simplest explanation of dodge and burn technique. But I guess there's just one more added benefit. Let me explain. I'm going to deactivate this in case we actually won't needing it anymore, so I'll completely delete group and the content. I'm going to create the new curves layer. Actually, let me go back for a second and show you that if you Alt or Option click on this little icon, it will prompt you to name it, so might as well do it here. Dodge. Everything else can remain the same, but I have to manually invert the mask. And the thing I wanted to show you is the difference when working on large areas that has quite a bit of dimension. Like here on her face, we have certain shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if you're working on this area and you wanted to affect it, you just wanted to dodge or burn that area, there is somewhat of a benefit using the curves option instead of the blank layer or the soft light blend mode option. So let me show you. I'm going to create a new layer. Let's call that one dodge as well. And as you remember from the previous video, I'll set it to soft light. Now it's ready for dodging or burning. And I'm going to lower my zoom ratio here, and let's increase my brush size. I'm set everything to 100% just to show you just how big of a difference can I make. And let's work on this area. I want to work on this area here, maybe lighten this patch here and here. And if I were to click on the layer, I don't see much of it, but okay, maybe we can create another 50% gray layer and put it underneath this one so you can better see the area where I painted. And maybe we can group this now. This is just for demonstration purposes. What I really wanted to show you is that I don't need this one anymore. This was just to show you how the dodge layer looks. The reason I didn't use the soft light blend mode with 50% gray layer is because then I cannot reselect the area that I worked on. And that's what I wanted to do, because now I want to do the same thing but using the curves. So I'm going to click on it. I'm going to click on this mask, and in fact I'm gonna delete this mask so I can transfer the selection. I'm gonna Alt drag it to the trash can, and with the selection still active, I've selected my curves layer. I'm gonna press on the mask. It's gonna create my own mask associated with the curves layer, which is identical to this one. So I'm gonna increase my lightness option, and let me show you something. And I can even go really far. Now here's the real benefit when using dodging tools. If you want to dodge a larger area that has a lot of tones, when using your curves layer, you're actually quite subtly affecting the entire area. You're not affecting every pixel in the same way, and not as robust as you would when using the soft light blend mode. So what I did here, I basically lightened this area, that's true, but as you can see, the shadows pretty much remain the same. I can even add more points to it to get more subtle effect, and this now becomes almost like color correction. While with this one, it's a static command. So you can see it pretty much affected the shadows, the highlights, everything almost identically. And you get more of a flat looking effect, I would say. Not sure if you understand the difference, but with curves you get more dynamic effect. Now when you're using for smaller areas, that's not as visible and there's no real difference. But when working on these bigger areas, then you would use curves, I guess, because they allow you more control and they produce better results. And at the end of the day, they did make curves as a tonal color correction adjustment tool. And this is just a way to simulate this similar process. So when working on large areas, if you prefer the method of soft light, working on large areas, you should combine the soft light method with this one for best results. And of course, I can not only lighten this area, because this is curves, I can also switch the color of this. To any other color that I want, just with curves. And that is how you would use the curves layers, two curves layers method for dodging and burning. I think that pretty much covers it. And in the next video I'll go over how do you deal with the side effects of dodging and burning.